Hello, so this is the third hour of rotational. Here we are going to talk about couple, shifting of normal that leads us to toppling, followed by what is angular momentum, how to write it. Then we will talk about Newton's second law for rotational motion that gives us the equation torque equals to I alpha. So without wasting time, let's start with the first topic, that is couple. So what is actually a couple? So we say two forces of equal magnitude acting in opposite direction such that their line of action are separated by some distance constitute a couple. So if you have got any rigid body and if two forces of equal magnitude act in opposite direction, so the first force and the second force acting in opposite direction such that their line of action is separated by some distance, there has to be some separation between their line of action, then you say that these two forces constitute a couple. What is so special about a couple? So let's say we have got two equal forces of same magnitude acting in opposite direction and there is some distance between their line of action d. You say that the net force due to a couple is zero. Why? Because both the forces are equal and opposite, so the net force has to be zero. But better, the net torque won't be zero. Now see, if you assume any goddammit point, let's say this point A, about the point A, the lowest point, the torque of this force will be zero. But due to the force upper side, there will be a torque. This torque will be clockwise equals to Fd. Or if you look about the topmost point, let's say B, about the topmost point, the torque of this force will be zero. Why? Because this force has got its line of action passing through B, so its torque will be zero. But there will be a torque due to the force acting at the lowest point. This torque will try to turn it clockwise, and as the force is perpendicular to D, you will say that the torque is Fd clockwise. If I say no, I don't like these two extreme points A and B, I like a special point, let's say somewhere here, C, such that if I call this point A, this point B, and somewhere in the middle a point C at distance x from A. So about this point C, about the point C, due to the force acting at B, distance perpendicular will be d minus x. So the torque of this force will be clockwise equals to F into d minus x. Now focus on point C, focus on point A, and at the point A, a force Fx at a distance x. So you will say because of this force, just focus C and A. So this force also tries to turn it clockwise. So you will say about point C, due to the force at point A, the torque will be equals to Fx. So the net torque will be F of d minus x clockwise plus Fx clockwise. So that gives you Fd minus Fx plus Fx clockwise, that gives you Fd clockwise. So I want you to notice one strange thing. The torque due to a couple is nothing but the magnitude of force times the distance between the line of action of force. Once more, the torque due to a couple is nothing but the force times the distance between the line of action of force. So torque net equals to Fd. And the special thing about the couple is the torque produced by a couple is independent of the point about which we are writing the torque. To explain you, I wrote the torque about point A, that came out to be Fd clockwise. I wrote the torque about point B, that came out to be Fd clockwise. I wrote the torque about a point C, that again came out to be Fd clockwise, right? So about all these 3 points, the torque came out to be Fd clockwise. The beauty of couple is that even if you write the torque about some random point in space, it still come out to be Fd clockwise. So remember that when we write the torque due to a single force, when we write the torque due to a single force, the magnitude of torque depends upon about which point you are writing the torque. If let's say a force acts at a point, if I write the torque of this force about one point O on the same line, you will say, sir, the angle between R and F will be 0, so the torque will be 0. And for same force about another point O dash, you will get another torque. And about another point O double dash, you will get another torque. So for a given force, when you write torque about different points, you will get different magnitude of torque. But that's not the case with couple. This is the beauty of couple. The torque produced by a couple is independent of the point about which we are writing the torque, and that's the beauty. So what do we have to remember in couple? Very simple. If two forces of same magnitude act in opposite directions such that their line of action is separated by some distance, they constitute a couple. The net force applied by a couple is zero, and the net torque applied by a couple is nothing but the magnitude of force times the separation between their line of action. So easy, right? Now let's move on to the next heading, which is shifting of normal. Let's say we have a block placed on a horizontal surface. If we have a block placed on a horizontal surface, at which point the force of gravity acts? Huh? At which point the force of gravity acts on the block? The block is made up of infinite number of masses, and on each and every infinitely small mass there will be a force of gravity downward. So if we visualize the force of gravity, it will act at all the masses on the block. But sir, we have done a lot of question on mechanical equilibrium. Okay, there every time you assume the force of gravity to be acting at the center of mass. Yes, because the line of action of all these forces can be assumed to be passing through the center of mass. So you can say, rather than visualizing force on each and every mass, I can assume the entire force of gravity to be acting at the center of mass. So you say the line of action of all the forces passes through the center of mass. Similarly, there is one more force acting on the block. And remember the heading, we are learning shifting of normal. The normal force shifts. Okay. So if I ask you, there is one more force acting on this block. Which is that force? You will say, sir, there is even force of normal on the block. Now, it's not that the force of normal acts only on the line passing through center of mass. The force of normal actually acts at each and every contact point. So that's what this diagram represents. It shows how does the force of normal acts. Now, since the force of normal is balanced uniformly everywhere, we can say that the line of action of this force of normal also passes through the center of mass. So when we have got a rectangular block placed on the table, the force of gravity acts on every point. We say that the line of action of this force of gravity can be taken to be passing through the center of mass. Similarly, the force of normal acts at each point, and we can say that the line of action of this force of normal also passes through the center of mass. For equilibrium in vertical direction, right? If the block has to be in equilibrium, then we know that the force of normal has to be equals to the weight of the block. So normal has to be equals to mg. But the heading we are learning is the shifting of normal. So sir, why will the normal force shift? Let's study, listen carefully. So now let's say we have applied some horizontal force on the block from outside. Now tell me, this horizontal force has a torque about the center of mass in which sense? Clockwise or anti-clockwise? So whenever I ask you these type of question, forget every other force. Just look at the body on which the force is acting. Just look at its center of mass and just look at the force and think that this whole system is in space. So if you take this whole system to space and the body is free to move and you apply a horizontal force somewhere above the center of mass, how will the body turn? So sir, this force provides a clockwise torque. This force provides a clockwise torque. Now, we know in our everyday life observation, if we apply a small force above the center of mass, it is producing some torque, but we know that for small value of force, the body just doesn't rotate suddenly, right? Why does the body not rotate? What stops the body from rotating? In our real life experiences, if we have got a block placed on table and we apply some force, it does not happen that on applying a small force the body topples. You have to apply a large force to turn the body, right? So who balances the torque of the external force? And that's what we are learning, shifting of normal. The line of action of normal shifts in such a way to balance the external torque, given that it is within its limit to shift and balance. If the external torque applied by you is so high that the line of action of normal after shifting can't balance the external torque, then the body topples. Sir, what are you saying? I'm not able to get it. Listen carefully. When we apply some force at a point above the center of mass, this force provides a clockwise torque. I know that for small value of force in everyday life, the body does not topple. It means that somebody must be providing the anti-clockwise torque. So what happens when you apply a force? The normal on the left hand side decreases. The normal on the right hand side increases. No doubt the sum of all these forces is still mg, because for equilibrium in vertical direction the normal reaction has got its overall sum equals to mg. But since the normal on the left hand side, which was initially uniform in the absence of external force, the normal on the left hand side decreases and the normal on the right hand side increases. Hence the line of action of normal shifts. Now it does not pass through the center of mass. It shifts towards more forces. So now you will say the magnitude of sum of all these forces is still mg, but the line of action of normal has shifted. Now this shifting of normal provides the counterclockwise torque. And if by shifting of normal, the normal can balance the external torque, it balances the external torque and prevent the body from toppling. Now if we keep on increasing our applied force, the applied torque will increase. So the torque due to normal should also increase, but the magnitude of normal is constant. If the torque due to normal has to increase, keeping the magnitude of force constant, it means that the separation of the line of action should increase. So when we apply even a higher force, the normal shifts even further. So listen to this carefully. Shifting of normal provides a counter torque that balances the torque of the external force. Shifting of normal provides a counter torque which balances the torque of the external force. Now, if you keep on increasing this force F, the line of action of normal keeps on shifting. So on this side, the normal keeps on decreasing, and on this side, the normal keeps on increasing. But remember, the sum of all these normals still remains equals to mg for vertical equilibrium. So you will see even lesser number of forces, contact forces acting on the left, and more number of contact forces acting on the right. So we will say that the line of action of normal has shifted even further. Now if you keep on increasing F, the line of action of normal keeps on shifting. My question to you is, what is the maximum distance up to which the line of action of normal can shift? Sir, if you keep on increasing F for even higher value of F, there will come a point at which the entire line of action of normal would have shifted to the extreme. And once the line of action of normal has shifted to the extreme, now the counter torque provided by normal will be maximum. If you further increase the force, then normal won't be able to balance the external torque, and then the body will topple. So that's why in everyday life, when we apply a small force, the body does not topple. Why? Because the normal shift and balances the external torque. On increasing the external force, the external torque increases. So as to increase the counter torque, so as to prevent toppling, the line of action of normal keeps on shifting. The maximum distance up to which the line of action of normal can shift, that is up to the extreme. So this is the extreme case. Here normal has shifted to its maximum possible distance. So you can say the maximum possible torque that shifting of normal can provide is, how much maximum possible torque can shifting of normal provide in this case? So we know that for mechanical equilibrium, for equilibrium in vertical direction, normal has to be equals to mg. And we have said that the line of action of normal here can shift a maximum by a distance L by 2. So center of mass, the distance perpendicular is L by 2. So the maximum torque that the shifting of normal can provide is N into L by 2. So you will say the maximum torque that shifting of normal can provide is N into L by 2. That can also be written as mg into L by 2, as the magnitude of normal reaction will be equal to the weight of the block. So beta, the bottom line is that if the torque due to external force, is less than mg L by 2, then the normal shifts provides equal and opposite counter torque and prevents the body from toppling. But if the torque due to the external force is more than mgl by 2, then the body topples. So let's see some important points about toppling. Okay. The first point, if the external torque is within the limit that normal can shift and prevent toppling. If the external torque is not so high that normal can shift and prevent toppling, it shifts and prevents toppling. So if the external torque is within the limit to be balanced by shifting of normal, the normal shifts and prevents toppling. If the external torque is so high that even after shifting to maximum, the normal can't prevent toppling. If the external torque is so high that even after shifting to maximum, the normal can't prevent toppling, then the body topples. So this is the basic idea, what I have just said. Let's take an example to understand it more. So question is, there is a cuboidal block. This cuboidal block has a height h and it has a base length L. What will be the maximum possible value of F? What will be the maximum possible value of F for which the block will not topple? So up to which value of F this block will not topple? So now we know that if we think of the force F acting at the topmost point, the distance of the line of action of this force from the center of mass will be h by 2. And the maximum possible torque that the shifting of normal can provide is when the normal shifts to the extreme. The line of action of normal shifts to the extreme. And the counter torque that it can provide by shifting the line of action is n into L by 2. So you can say, if we think of the force, its line of action is at distance h by 2. And if the normal shifts to maximum, its line of action will be at a distance L by 2 from the center of mass. So the maximum possible torque that can be provided by shifting of normal is n into L by 2. If you want the body not to topple, what is the maximum possible value of F for which the block will not topple? For not toppling, the torque due to the external force should be less than the maximum possible torque that the shifting of normal can provide. So the maximum possible torque that can be provided by shifting of normal is n into L by 2. That will be equals to mg into L by 2. As we know that for equilibrium in vertical direction, the upward force of normal has to be equals to mg. So we will say for not toppling, the external torque F into h by 2, the external torque F into h by 2 should be less than the maximum possible torque that shifting of normal can provide. So on both the sides, cancelling out by 2 by 2, you will say that F has to be less than equals to mgl by h. So for body not to topple, the applied force should be less than or equal to mgl by h. It can maximum be equal or less. If the force becomes greater than mgl by h, then even after shifting to extreme, the shifting of normal won't be able to prevent toppling. So they are asking the maximum possible value of F. You will say, sir, the maximum possible value of F for which the block won't topple will be mgl by h. Okay. So for not toppling, maximum force is mg into L by h. Let's see more examples. A question here. There is a frictionless surface, mu is 0, and we have a cubical block of side length A. We are applying an external force at a height a by 4 above the center of mass. Question is, determine the maximum possible acceleration, not force, determine the maximum possible acceleration that the force can provide without toppling the cubical block. So our mission is to find the maximum possible acceleration that the force can provide without toppling the cubical block. So to provide the maximum possible acceleration, you need the maximum possible force. So all you need to do in this question is to find the maximum possible force for which this block won't topple. Okay. So you will say, if the block has a mass m, if this cubical block has a mass m, then torque maximum by shifting of normal will be mg into a by 2. Sir, how can you say? See, bachcho, if you have a cubical block of side length a, when you increase the external force, the counter torque by shifting of normal should increase. The maximum counter torque you can get by shifting of normal is when the normal would have shifted to the extreme, and we know that normal has to be equals to mg. So the maximum counter torque that the shifting of normal can provide is mg into a by 2. Now determine the maximum possible acceleration that the force can provide without toppling the cubical block. So what can be the maximum possible acceleration this force can provide? To determine the maximum possible acceleration that this force can provide, we need to know what can be the maximum possible force for which this block won't topple. So you can say the maximum torque we can get by shifting of normal is mg into a by 2. For not toppling, the external torque F into a by 4. So how did you get F into a by 4? Well, very simple. Think of the line of action of force and think of the distance perpendicular. So F into a by 4, the external torque should be less than equals to mg into a by 2. Better cancel out a 4 here, you get a 2. So 4 has to be less than equals to 2 mg. So for not toppling, force has to be less than equal to 2 mg. So the maximum possible force that can be applied without toppling the block is 2 mg. And if the maximum possible force you can apply is 2 mg, the maximum possible acceleration you can provide is 2g. 2 mg by m, 2g. So force has to be less than equals to 2 mg. The maximum possible force for which the block won't topple is 2 mg. If the maximum possible force you can apply for which the block won't topple is 2 mg, then the maximum possible acceleration of the block will be the maximum possible force divided by its mass, that will be 2g. Okay. Now let's see the next case. So we have done the case when friction is not present. So how to solve a toppling case in the absence of friction, but in the presence of friction, what to do? So toppling with friction. Now in case of friction, you have to be very cautious what is the language of the question statement. There will be two types of statement and we need to understand both of them very clearly. So first case, when the body topples before slipping. So if you are applying a force on a body, the body topples but the body does not slip. The body topples but body does not slip. So when the body topples before slipping, when you apply the force, the body is toppling but the body is not slipping. I ask you a simple question. If the body is not slipping, which type of friction force will act? So body is not slipping, which type of friction force will act? So if they say that the body topples before slipping, it means that the body is toppling on increasing the force, but body is not slipping. If the body is not slipping, the type of friction force will be acting is static friction force. A static friction force is self-adjusting force. If I ask you that on a table, I apply a force F and the body is not at all sliding, what is the friction force? So you will say, sir, the friction force has to be equal and opposite to the applied force. So if in the question it is written that the body topples before slipping, it means that the body topples but the body do not slip. If the body do not slip, then I can say that the friction force acting is static in nature and it will have a magnitude equal to the applied force. So you say if the body does not slip, then the friction force acting has to be equal to external force, right? The second case, if the body slips before toppling, so if you are increasing the force, so first the body slips and then the body topples. It means that at the time of toppling, the body was slipping. If at the time of toppling, the body was slipping, it means that the type of friction force acting will be kinetic in nature. And we know that the kinetic friction force has a constant value. So you will say if the external force is F and the body slips before toppling, it means that at the time of toppling the body is slipping. So the type of friction force acting will be kinetic friction force. So you can say as the body slips at the time of toppling, the friction force acting must be equals to kinetic friction force. And these are the two things you have to understand. So if in question they say that the body topples before slipping, it means that at the time of toppling it is not at all slipping. So the type of friction force acting must be static friction force. If they say the body slips before toppling, it means that at the time of toppling the body was already slipping. So the friction force acting must be equals to kinetic friction force. Okay. That has to be equals to, in this case, mu k mg. So let's do a question both on each type to understand them better. The first case, there is an external force acting at a height a by 4 above the center of mass, and we have a cubical block of side length a. If the cubical block of mass m topples before slipping, it means that at the time of toppling it is not at all slipping. If it topples before slipping, at the time of toppling it is not at all slipping, so I can say that the friction force acting must be equals to F in opposite direction. Okay, determine the minimum value of F required to topple. What has to be the minimum force required to topple it? Now here in this case, apart from the external force F acting at a height a by 4 above the center, there is also a friction force acting at a distance a by 2 below the center of mass. Now beta, visualize one of them at a time. Just focus on block, its center of mass, and the applied force. The applied force act at a height a by 4 above the center of mass. This applied force is trying to turn the block clockwise or counterclockwise. So this applied force is trying to turn it clockwise. Now again, just visualize the block, its center of mass, and the friction force. Forget everything else. So in space you have this block, it has its center of mass, and at the lowest point you are applying a force F here. So this force is also trying to turn it clockwise. So we do understand the external force as well as the friction force, both are trying to turn the block in the same sense, clockwise. So both the torques are aiding toppling, while shifting of normal will be the only torque that will try to prevent toppling. So the external force tries to topple, the friction force tries to topple, while shifting of normal is the only force which is trying to balance the toppling. So you will say, if the body does not slip, if the body is not at all slipping, then the friction force acting has to be equals to F, because the body is not slipping. Since the body is not slipping, the type of friction force acting is static, and for static friction force, the self-adjusting force, you can say F to be equals to F. So you will say the net torque, net external torque will be due to the applied force at a height a by 4 and a friction force at a distance a by 2 below. So you will say the net torque will be F into a by 4 clockwise plus F into a by 2 clockwise. The distance of this line of action of friction will be a by 2. Okay, so external force, line of action at distance a by 4 plus the torque due to friction force F at a distance a by 2. But we know that the magnitude of friction force is also F. So you can write F into a by 4 plus F into a by 2. That becomes 3F a by 4. F a by 4 plus F a by 2, that becomes 3F a by 4. If we need to find the minimum force F required to topple, then we can say that the external torque should be greater than equal to the maximum torque you can get by shifting of normal. So for toppling, the external torque 3F a by 4 should be greater than the maximum torque you can get by shifting of normal. And the maximum torque you can get by shifting of normal is when the entire normal force acts at the extreme. Normal force will be equals to mg. So when the external torque is greater than mg into a by 2. Now bachcho, cancel out a and a 2 here, you get a 2 here. So you get 3F by 2 is greater than mg, or F is greater than 2mg by 3. So F has to be greater than 2mg by 3. Okay, let's see the next example. But before that, one point. Beta, here the friction force aids toppling or the friction force opposes toppling? The friction force aids toppling, the friction force opposes toppling. Since the friction force provides torque in the same sense as the external force, here the friction force aids toppling. It helps in toppling the block. So notice that the friction force supports toppling in this particular case. Let's move on to the next example. Now here we are applying a force F at the topmost point on a cubical block. Again, the surface is rough and the friction coefficient is 0.5. Question is, if the cubical block slips before toppling, so at the time of toppling it is already slipping. If the cubical block slips before toppling, find the value of F required to topple. So how much force will be required to topple this block? So you will say the block has a mass M, and we are applying a force F at the highest point here. The cubical block has a side length A and the friction coefficient is 0.5. Question is, find the value of F required to topple the block. So you will say Sir, when you apply a force here, the friction force will act in opposite direction. As per the problem statement, they have mentioned that the block slips before toppling. It means that at the time of toppling, the block was already slipping. So the type of friction force acting will be kinetic friction force. So we can say, as the body slips before toppling, at the time of toppling, it is slipping. So the friction force acting has to be equals to kinetic friction force, that has to be equals to mu mg, and since mu is 0.5, that will be 0.5 mg, and 0.5 mg can be written as mg by 2. So the friction force acting will be mg by 2. Now you can say, find the value of F required to topple. How much force is required to topple? So sir, friction, external force provides clockwise torque, friction provides clockwise torque. Only the shifting of normal is the one which will provide anti-clockwise torque. For toppling, the torque due to the external force and friction force should be greater than the counter torque due to shifting of normal. So you say for toppling, F into A by 2 plus kinetic friction force into A by 2 should be greater than equal to mg into A by 2. So bachcho, you can cancel out A by 2, A by 2, A by 2. So you will get F plus Fk, which is mg by 2, equals to mg. And you can take this mg by 2 to the right hand side, so F comes out to be simply mg by 2. So this can be the maximum force that can be applied for which the block won't topple, or the minimum force required to topple. So you will say F into A by 2 plus mg by 2 into A by 2 has to be greater than equal to mg into A by 2. Now this becomes mg A by 4, and this is mg A by 2. You take it to the right, you get mg A by 2 minus mg A by 4. That gives you mg A by 4. So we get F into A by 2 has to be greater than equal to mg into A by 4. So cancel out AA, this 2. Here you get a 2 in the denominator. So you get F has to be greater than equals to mg by 2. So the force applied to topple it has to be greater than half the weight of the cubical block. So let's move on to the next heading, that is angular momentum. So what is angular momentum? Sir, just like you have force in translational motion, you have torque in rotational motion. And just like you have momentum in translational motion, you have got angular momentum in rotational motion. So now let's understand the definition of angular momentum, and the definition of angular momentum is quite similar to that of torque. So if you have understood yesterday's lecture, the last hour, you will be able to understand this hour really good. And if you haven't, better listen to it again. Torque and angular momentum are brother sister, same concepts will be used here as well. So let's say there is a particle of mass m which has a velocity v. If I ask you what is the momentum of this particle, you will say, it's very easy, momentum has to be mv. Momentum is a vector quantity. Now if we need to write the angular momentum of this mass about any point O in space, we say that the momentum will be mv, and the angular momentum of this mass about any point O in space is given by r cross p. Just like we write the torque about a point, we also write the angular momentum about a point. Torque we get from cross product, it's a vector quantity. Similarly, angular momentum we also get from cross product, it is also a vector quantity. Now since we know that angular momentum equals to r cross p, the magnitude of angular momentum will be magnitude of r into magnitude of p into sine of the angle between them. If the angle between r and p, if the angle between position vector and momentum vector is 0 degree or 180 degree, then the magnitude of angular momentum will be 0. As we know that the magnitude of angular momentum will be magnitude of r into magnitude of p into sine of the angle between them. If you substitute theta as 0, sine 0 is 0. If you substitute theta as 180, sine 180 is 0. So beta, if you have got two parallel vectors or anti-parallel vectors, their cross product is 0. So let's say you have a mass m moving with a velocity v, and an observer O is looking at it, at the mass going. If beta r and p are parallel vectors, the magnitude of cross product will be 0. Similarly, if the observer observes a mass coming towards it, an observer observes a mass coming towards it, then the position vector and the momentum vector will be anti-parallel. So the angle between r and p will be 180. again the magnitude of angular momentum will be 0. So remember that if the angle between r and p is 0 or 180, then the magnitude of angular momentum about the observer will be 0. Simple thing. Now we will keep on learning the same things we learned in the last hour for tau. So more on angular momentum. If we have a particle going with a momentum p such that the momentum makes an angle theta with the position vector. Sir, how can you say that this r and p have some angle theta? Beta, the angle between the vectors is the angle between them when they are joined tail to tail. Move p such that it tail touches the tail of r. So this angle will be the angle between the vectors now, and this angle is same as theta. So it is this angle theta represents the angle between r and p. We can break down p into components p cos theta and p sin theta. We know that magnitude of angular momentum equals to magnitude of r into magnitude of p into sine of the angle between them. We can take this p sin theta together and write magnitude of angular momentum equals to magnitude of r into magnitude of p sin theta. What is p sin theta? The component of momentum perpendicular to r. So we can even write angular momentum as length times momentum perpendicular. The same thing I said yesterday. You can write torque as length times force perpendicular, right? It's the same thing. Or you can say, if we have got position vector, if we have got momentum, if we extend the line of momentum, yesterday in the last hour we extended the line of force, right? So if we extend the line of momentum, the distance perpendicular will have a magnitude r sin theta. So we know that the magnitude of angular momentum equals to magnitude of r into magnitude of p into sine of the angle between them. This time take sine theta with r. So you will say the magnitude of angular momentum equals to magnitude of r into sine theta together into magnitude of p. So this can be written as momentum times length perpendicular. Momentum times length perpendicular. So you can write angular momentum as length times momentum perpendicular or momentum times length perpendicular. As I said yesterday, to use force times length perpendicular, extend the line of action of force and then drop a perpendicular. Similarly, to use momentum times length perpendicular, extend the line of momentum and then drop a perpendicular. So let's see angular momentum more through some example. So the question here, a particle of mass m is projected with a speed v at an angle theta with the horizontal. Determine the angular momentum of particle about the point of projection when. So a particle has been projected with a speed v at an angle theta with the horizontal. You need to determine the angular momentum of the particle about the point of projection. So this point is O. When the particle is at its maximum height and when it is just about to land. So let's do the first part first. When the particle is at its maximum height. Okay, what do we need to find? When the particle is at its maximum height, the first part, what is the angular momentum about the point of projection? So at the maximum height, there will be no vertical velocity, there will be only horizontal velocity v cos theta. So the entire momentum will be in horizontal direction, that will be equals to mv cos theta. What is the mission? The mission is to write the angular momentum about the point of projection. So we can write angular momentum as length times momentum perpendicular or momentum times length perpendicular. Here, sir, extend the line of momentum. So if you extend the line of momentum and drop a perpendicular from the point about which you wish to write, the angular momentum, you get that this distance is nothing but maximum height. So you know the momentum mv cos theta. You know the formula for maximum height. Maximum height is v square sine square theta by 2g. So you already know what will be the angular momentum. So at the maximum height, speed will be v cos theta, momentum will be mv cos theta, and to find the distance perpendicular, drop a perpendicular. So the maximum height itself is the distance perpendicular from the point of projection. So you will say angular momentum is nothing but mv cos theta, the momentum times distance perpendicular, that will be the maximum height. And you know that maximum height can be written as v square sine square theta by 2g. So here you got m, you got v into v square, that becomes vq. You got cos theta into sin square theta by 2g. So what you get is angular momentum equals to mvq sin square theta cos theta by 2g. Simple. The second point, what will be the angular momentum about the point of projection when the particle is just about to land? So look at the momentum of the particle when it is just about to land. So we know that when the particle is just about to land, its speed will be v. The mass is m. If this angle is theta, this angle will also be theta. We need to write the angular momentum about the point of projection. Let's call it O. So just visualize the position vector and the momentum vector. The position vector will have a magnitude equals to range. And we know that the momentum vector is mv, making an angle theta with the horizontal. We can write angular momentum as length times momentum perpendicular. And momentum perpendicular will be nothing but mv sine theta. So simply the answer has to be r into mv sine theta. You can write angular momentum as length times momentum perpendicular. So at the time of just about to land, it will have a speed v at an angle theta with the horizontal. So you will say the angular momentum has to be equals to length times momentum perpendicular. So that will be equals to r into mv sine theta. Game over. You know that the range of a projectile is v square sine 2 theta by g. Substitute it here, you will get your answer. So the angular momentum comes out to v square sine 2 theta by g into mv sine theta. So that gives you bachcho mvq sine 2 theta into sine theta by g. It's a simple thing, not at all a difficult thing. Moving on. A particle of mass m moves in a circle with a speed v in a circle of radius r. Determine the angular momentum about the center of circle. So this is a simple question, but there is some importance here. So let's say we have a particle of mass m moving with a speed v in a circle of radius r. You need to tell what is the angular momentum about the center. So you will say, okay, the angular momentum about the center, I need two things, vector r and vector momentum. Here the momentum is already perpendicular to the position vector. The position vector has a magnitude equals to r and the momentum vector has a magnitude mv and the angle between them is 90. Since already the entire momentum is perpendicular to r, I can simply say that angular momentum will be nothing but r times mv. So the angular momentum will be length times momentum perpendicular, which will be nothing but r times mv. So you said that angular momentum is mvr. Sir, we know this already. Why you even took an example to explain this? In chemistry, we have learned when an electron revolves around the nucleus, its angular momentum is mvr. But what we do not focus there upon is the angular momentum is mvr about which point? That's what the focus lies in. For the same position of particle, if I ask you what is the angular momentum about a point x diametrically opposite, then beta the length has to be taken as 2r. And you will say for the same position of particle doing the circular motion, the angular momentum will be equals to 2r times length times momentum perpendicular, that will be 2 mvr. So what I want you guys is to know, when you say that for a particle doing circular motion, angular momentum is mvr, beta about which point? About the center of the circle, not about any generalized point in space. Okay? Let's move on to the next example, and this one is really important. Question is, the figure shows a particle moving with a constant velocity. Okay? It goes with a constant velocity from A to B. As the particle goes from A to B, its angular momentum about O, what? Increases, decreases, or remains constant. Now the people who think that angular momentum equals to r into p, they will think that at A, r is less, at B, r is more. Sir, the magnitude of momentum is same, but as the magnitude of r increases, the angular momentum should increase, right? Beta, always think of angular momentum as r cross p, or think of it as momentum times length perpendicular or length times momentum perpendicular. Here, as the particle moves with a constant velocity, its line of momentum remains the same. As the line of momentum remains the same, the distance perpendicular remains the same. Whether the particle is at point A or at point B, since the distance perpendicular remains the same, its angular momentum about O remains the same. So as the particle goes from A to B, its angular momentum about O neither increases nor decreases and remains the same. Once more, listen to it. If the particle is moving in a straight line with a constant velocity, you are asking me what happens to the angular momentum of the particle about O. Does it increase, does it decrease, or does it remain the same? So you will say, since the particle is moving with a constant velocity, its line of momentum will remain the same, the distance perpendicular will remain the same, hence the angular momentum will remain the same. So as the particle goes from A to B, its distance perpendicular remains constant, the momentum remains constant, hence the angular momentum remains constant. So as the particle go from A to B, the angular momentum neither increases nor decreases, it remains constant. So the next heading, what is the angular momentum of a body when it performs pure rotational motion? What we have just learned is the angular momentum of a particle about a point. When a particle moving with a momentum p and you need to write its angular momentum about a point O, you write it as r cross p. But how to write the angular momentum of a body which is doing pure rotational motion? So you will say, let's assume a body doing pure rotational motion about an axis with an angular velocity omega. And let's assume this body has got multiple small masses on it. A mass m1 at distance r1, a mass m2 at distance r2, a mass m3 at distance r3, and the whole system rotates with an angular velocity omega. Question is, what is going to be the angular momentum of this body performing pure rotational motion? So you will say, sir, we have just learned if a body performs circular motion, then the angular momentum about the center is mvr. Here, the mass m1, which has got radius r1, will have some speed, let's say v1, and that v1 will be equals to omega into r1. Similarly, the mass m2, which rotates in a circle of radius r2 with an angular velocity omega, will have a speed v2 equals to omega r2, and the mass m3 will, let's say, have a speed v3 equals to omega r3. Now, if we wish to write the angular momentum of the whole body, I will write it as m1 v1 r1 plus m2 v2 r2 plus m3 v3 r3 and so on. So you will say that the angular momentum of the whole rigid body will be m1 v1 r1 plus m2 v2 r2 plus m3 v3 r3 and so on. Yeah, I know that angular momentum is a vector quantity, but since all the particles are rotating in the same sense, they are doing pure rotational motion, their angular momentum is in same direction, so you can add up simply their magnitude. Now beta, in place of v1 you can write omega r1, in place of v2 you can write omega r2, in place of v3 you can write omega r3. So you get angular momentum equals to m1 into omega r1 into r1 plus m2 into omega r2 into r2 plus m3 into omega r3 into r3. Now from each term take omega common. Once you take the omega common, what you get is angular momentum of this whole rigid body equals to m1 into r1 into r1, m1 r1 square plus m2 into r2 into r2, m2 r2 square plus m3 into r3 into r3, m3 r3 square, and so on, multiplied by the angular velocity of the body. Now this term right here represents what? m1 r1 square plus m2 r2 square plus m3 r3 square. So this term is the moment of inertia. So we can say that the angular momentum of a body doing pure rotational motion about an axis is given by nothing but its moment of inertia about the axis times omega. So angular momentum equals to I omega. Now a simple question to practice. The question is, you have a rod of mass m having a length L rotating about an axis passing through its center and perpendicular to length with an angular velocity omega. Question is, a rod of mass m and length L rotates about an axis passing through its center and perpendicular to it with an angular velocity omega. Determine the angular momentum. So we have just learned angular momentum is nothing but I omega. On the first hour of rotational, we have learned how to write the moment of inertia. We know that moment of inertia of this rod about an axis passing through its center perpendicular to its length will be ml square by 12. So the angular momentum has to be ml square by 12 into omega. So we will say L equals to I omega. So that will be equals to ml square by 12 into omega. Game over. Okay. So such an easy thing. Moving on to the next heading we need to talk about. What is the relationship between torque and angular momentum? So what is the relationship between force and momentum? We know that torque is analogous to force and angular momentum is analogous to momentum. From the Newton's second law for translational motion, we say that the net external force acting on a body is equals to the rate of change of momentum with respect to time. So we say that F equals to dP by dt from Newton's second law. Similarly, we have a Newton's second law for rotational motion. We say that the net external torque acting equals to the rate of change of angular momentum with respect to time. So we say torque equals to dL by dt, the rate of change of angular momentum with respect to time. This is also called Newton's second law for rotational motion. Now, for a pure rotational motion of rigid body, okay, for the pure rotational motion of a rigid body, we have just learned we can write angular momentum as I omega. So torque can be written as di omega by dt. If the body is rigid, the masses are neither coming closer nor away from the axis, then beta the moment of inertia will be constant. If the moment of inertia will be constant, you can take it out of the differentiation. So you will say torque equals to I times d omega by dt. And what is the rate of change of angular velocity with respect to time? So the rate of change of angular velocity with respect to time is angular acceleration. So you can write torque equals to I alpha. Sir, torque equals to I alpha is brother of F equals to ma. Yes, torque is analogous to force, moment of inertia analogous to mass, and alpha analogous to acceleration. Yes. Okay. So that's all for this hour. In the next hour, we will do questions based on torque equals to I alpha. That will be a nice hour to watch. See you guys in next hour. Bye bye. So that's all for now. See you guys in the next hour.